my violence began at an early age. I was just turning 17. I was walking home late one night on Granville Street.
Tonight, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls opens hearings in Vancouver.
Meanwhile, at the Quebec Inquiry into Public Services, an Algonquin man shares his journey through the child welfare system.
And the Conservative government closed prison farms, now a development. But it's still not certain if the cows will come home. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Beverly Andrews.
The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls is in the Vancouver area this week. Here's some testimony now from Jamie Lee Hamilton, retelling a terrifying experience she had with an officer at just 17 years old.
My violence began at an early age. I was just turning 17. I was walking home late one night on Granville Street, and a police squad car drove up and asked me to get in the car. There was a dog in the back, and the officer asked for my ID, which I produced, and he insisted that he wanted to give me a ride home. I didn't want to because I was only 2 blocks away from home, living at Hamilton and Seymour, but he insisted, and I didn't know what to do. I'm very young, and the next thing I know, I'm in Stanley Park in this squad car, and of course was forced to perform oral sex on the officer. And it was a very terrifying time for me. I didn't know whether I was going to survive. I thought, he could kill me. Like, I knew officers carry guns, and it was very, very difficult for me that night. And I remember something in his mind snapped, and he thought that there was a police car coming up behind, and he said, "I'm going to quickly drive away. You're going to get out of the car. I'm going to pretend that I'm talking to you, and that if they stop, that you're just providing me information." And so he stopped. This is way over in the middle of the park and deep into the park, and it's about 3 a.m. And I got out, and he drove away along with my ID, which I never had again for a very long time. But it was very terrifying because not only had I been through traumatic experience of this, what I consider a sexual assault, I also had to find my way out of the park, and I was pretty frightened, and that late, and I'm young. And
we've got more from the National Inquiry in Vancouver later in the show. A late-breaking story out of Alberta. RCMP say a young child from the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, west of Calgary, is dead, and several others have been taken to hospital. Few details are available. Paramedics on scene declared the child dead in a home on the reserve. In total, 14 children were taken to hospital in the area. Their ages or their medical conditions are unknown.
Today, the Quebec Inquiry into Indigenous Relations heard testimony concerning youth protection services. An Algonquin man described being torn from his home and, as a result, nearly losing his Indigenous identity. Tom Fenario has the story.
C'est une expression qu'on entend souvent, je me sentais comme une pomme.
Une pomme, ouais.
Qu'est-ce que vous voulez dire par là?
Rouge à l'extérieur, blanc à l'intérieur.
When he was 8 years old, Xavier Mouchoum was taken from his family in Lac-Simon First Nation and put into a foster home. In the 10 years he was in the system, he lost count of how many families he was in, somewhere between 14 and 20. None of them were Algonquin.
J'ai carrément perdu ma langue, perdu ma culture, le fait de qui j'étais, tu sais.
Moshum's emotional testimony made it clear that he's not the only one. Nearly half of his First Nation of Lac-Simon is under the age of 12. That's almost 800 children, and Moshum says many have been or are in the child welfare system.
Aujourd'hui, les jeunes de Lac-Simon, c'est tout en train de se perdre graduellement. C'est dommage. Puis pourtant, nous avons une belle culture, nous autres, là,
But Moshum's story is not all doom and gloom. He since relearned how to speak Anishinaabe and applied to become a foster family for children of his community. He also takes inspiration from 2 Atikamekw First Nations in Quebec who have negotiated to take over child welfare services from the province.
C'est en train de se faire. Ça pourrait prendre un bon 4-5 ans avant que cette loi-là puisse se permettre.
Moshum hopes that his testimony encourages change in the child welfare system, and that he can serve as an example for those who have already lived through it.
En tout cas, j'espère qu'aujourd'hui, je ne parais pas trop d'une pomme devant vous autres. Merci.
Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Val-d'Or, Quebec.
The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls is in Vancouver this week.
APTN's Tina House is at the inquiry and brings us the story of a transgender person who says the justice system not only failed her, but also the murdered and missing women in Canada.
Surrounded by elders, leaders, activists, and family members, the 4 commissioners of the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls National Inquiry will conduct hearings for the next 5 days, opening with a traditional welcome from the 4 host First Nations. For Commissioner Kajak Robinson, it was an opportunity to thank the many grassroots women and their supporters for fighting to get the National Inquiry established.
There has been unacceptable, horrific things that have happened. And for years you have marched with Eagle staff in hand across this country. You have kicked down doors of power to be heard. Not only the hallways of government, but even the hallways of your own leadership.
And one of those warrior women in the crowd is Gladys Raddick. She's the co-founder of the Walk for Justice, and she will also be testifying about her missing niece, Tamara Chipman.
I'm totally honored and thrilled for the families, because we have been asking for a decade for this inquiry, and our goal is to help the families in seeking justice for their loved ones, and our goal is to change for the future, to protect our future generations.
The first to testify in one of the 3 hearing rooms was Jamie Lee Hamilton. She's a former sex trade worker and a transgendered woman. She knew many of the women that went missing from the downtown east side. She testified that sex trade workers are not given a priority by police when they go missing.
I feel, that the women were deemed as disposable, and it was very, very tragic. Their lives were tragic. They were human beings, and they were sisters, mothers, daughters, loved ones, wives, partners, aunties, grandmas. They were human beings worthy of dignity and respect.
She says that sex trade workers are still going missing and being murdered at an alarming rate.
We have to provide support to those in vulnerable positions. We have to ensure that the Commission takes a bold, proactive approach with their recommendations.
Close to 100 witnesses will be sharing their testimony over the next 5 days with the 4 commissioners here in Richmond, and this sacred fire behind me will burn until the very last testimony is given. Tina House, APTN National News, Richmond.
After decades of talks and planning, the Anishinaabe Nation in Ontario finally has control over their education in their territory. As of April 1st, 23 of the 40 Anishinaabe Nation communities who signed the Master Education Agreement with Ontario and the Anishinaabe Education Agreement with the federal government take full control over the education for junior kindergarten to grade 12, as well as post-secondary funding. The participating communities wanted language, culture, and traditional ways to be a part of their children's teaching.
The world is remembering Martin Luther King Jr. today, 50 years after he was assassinated.
We are all a part of the fabric of this life. And when one string unravels, we all unravel.
People gathered at the King Monument in Washington before marching to the National Mall for an anti-racism rally. People also gathered in Memphis, Tennessee, outside the hotel where King was gunned down. Well, as you may have noticed, Beverly Andrews is joining me on the desk tonight. Beverly is our Toronto video journalist, but will be with us for the next month or so.
Thanks, Dennis. It's wonderful to be here.
And we're happy to have you here. A big welcome to APTN National News World Headquarters. A little chillier here in Winnipeg, I'm sure, than you're used to in Toronto.
It's not too bad. I grew up in Manitoba, so it's nice to be home.
And we're happy to have you here. I'm sure your family is happy to have you back here as well. We're going to step aside now for a quick break.
Coming up, new developments in the efforts to reopen prison farms. Stay with us. Here's a look at Thursday's weather, starting in the east. Cloudy and 11 in St. John's, sunny and -3 in Fredericton, rain and +1 in Cartwright, partly cloudy and -16 in La Grande, overcast and -1 in Gaspé, sunny and -3 in Montreal, -4 and sunny in North Bay, cloudy and -4 in Windsor, cloudy and -9 in Big Trout Lake, 0 in Thunder Bay. Partly cloudy in much of northern Manitoba, -12 in Churchill, -11 in Norway House. Partly cloudy and -7 in Barons River, -4 in Winnipeg. Sunny and -14 in North Battleford, cloudy and -11 in Regina. Partly cloudy and -12 in La Ronge and Meadow Lake.
Welcome back. There's been a development in the story of calls to reopen prison farms across the country. The farm programs were shut down by the Harper Conservatives as part of its tough on crime agenda. But supporters believe the work helps rehabilitate prisoners. A group near Kingston, Ontario have been safeguarding a herd of cows from one of the farms, hoping a change in government might also bring a change in attitudes. Before we get to the news on this, here's Annette Francis with an encore edition of her original story filed in March 2016.
Since 2010, Jeff Peters has been looking after this herd of 14 cows. They aren't his. They're from the old Collins Bay prison farm, just half an hour up the road. And Peters hopes they'll soon be able to return home.
They do take up quite a bit of space on my farm. So I'll be very glad when they go to their real home. And it's sad to say to a little baby calf, the best place for you to end up is in prison. But really, that's the way we feel.
5.5 years ago, in spite of strong protests, the animals from the Kingston prison farm were taken away on trucks to be sold off. Farm supporters were able to take in 23 of the animals, but the farm itself, like prison farms across Canada, were shut down by the Harper government. The Minister of Public Safety at the time said the cost of keeping the farms open was too high, and they didn't teach inmates usable skills.
We want to ensure that when prisoners are in prison, they are trained for skills and jobs where there is a market for them. And that's what the focus of public safety is going to be.
But that's not the opinion of the prison system watchdog. He says the farms offer real transferable skills.
The prison farms, or something like the prison farms, can be a very important part of correctional programming. Inmates learn those skills, but they also become different people. You know, working in agriculture, working with livestock actually allows you to focus on something that's not just about you. You have a sense of responsibility with the dairy herds, with other living things.
Supporters of the farms believe the animals also gave hardened prisoners a chance to learn about kindness. And for proof, they say they just need to check out the personality of the 23 cows that originally came from the penitentiary.
Some of the farmers commented when we took the cows to their farms, why are these cows so friendly? And the answer is the inmates reacted to them that way. And it's part of their therapy, you see.
Peters and other advocates like Diane Dowling never gave up hope of seeing the farms reopened. And with a new government in power, there's a new hope that could happen soon.
We don't know what it'll take to restore the infrastructure and under what circumstances it can be done, but you know, I believe that it will pay off for Canadian society in improved corrections and making our communities safer.
According to a statement from the Department of Public Safety, it is evaluating the cost and feasibility of reopening the program. Dowling and Peters are hoping to meet with the new Minister of Public Safety later this month. They say they'll keep up the pressure until the cows go home. Anna Francis, APTN National News, Kingston.
It's been close to a decade now, but those prison farm advocates continue to push to bring the cows home. They thought the fight was over when the Liberal government announced $4.3 million in its federal budget to reopen the prison farms at 2 Kingston prisons. Diane Dowling says it sounded great until they read the details. Instead, it's an ongoing battle.
The proposal is for a dairy goat operation at Joyceville and crops and horticulture and land management at both sites. So no livestock in the initial plan for Collins Bay. And so we were pretty shocked about the fact that there were no cows. I guess we, should have been prepared for anything, but the cows were such a central focus of our campaign.
Dowling remains optimistic. She says the Minister of Public Safety has asked them to come up with a plan that includes cattle. They have until the end of April.
And before we get into our break and our weather report, here's some weather they're facing in Texas, where everything is bigger, they say. This time-lapse video shows a dust storm moving in on Odessa, west of Dallas. Local forecasters say the dust blew in as part of a cold front, making for some dangerous driving conditions. Dust storms are a frequent occurrence in this part of the state, in an area known as the Permian Basin.
And Toronto residents are facing gale-force winds today that have left 10,000 customers without power.
When I was driving, my car was shaking a little bit, so I got a little bit scared by it.
To expect gusts of up to 90 kilometers per hour. Residents are finding it hard to get around. And the wind have whipped up to 3 to 5 feet of waves in Lake Ontario. City workers have even had to sweep up broken glass blown off the building in one neighborhood. In another, the powerful gusts mangled a construction crane.
Well, maybe I was wrong about the weather here in Winnipeg. You could be without power there in Toronto right now. People are fleeing Facebook as more revelations come out about the sharing of people's information. We've got more on that coming up after the break.
But first, here's a look at the rest of Thursday's weather forecast. Sunny in northern Alberta, -10 in Fort Chipewyan and Peace River. Sunny and -11 in Edmonton, cloudy and -9 in Lethbridge. Cloudy in Kamloops at +8, 2 degrees warmer in Victoria. Sunny and -6 in Fort Nelson, cloudy and +7 in Prince Rupert. In the Yukon, sunny and -12 in Rock River, cloudy and -3 in Whitehorse. Sunny and -5 in Wrigley, also sunny in Yellowknife and -10. Sunny and -16 in Sax Harbor, and more sun and -13 in Colville Lake. -21 and sunny in Cambridge Bay, partly sunny and -10 in Whale Cove. Sunny and -23 in Resolute, mainly cloudy in Cape Dorset and -7. Facebook now says data from up to 87 million users, including more than 600,000 in Canada, have been improperly shared with data mining firm Cambridge Analytica. That number is higher than previously estimated in published reports. Last month, whistleblower Christopher Wiley said Cambridge Analytica, a data mining firm affiliated with the Trump campaign, used ill-gotten data from 50 million Facebook users to try and influence elections. Facebook says users who had their data shared with Cambridge Analytica will be told via notice on their newsfeed next week.
Tony Cotie is well known in First Nations circles in Saskatchewan. The one-time chief has put a lot of time and effort over the years into improving the lives of young people. With more on how he does that, here's our colleagues at CTV Saskatoon.
It's a common occurrence for Tony Cotie to receive compliments and handshakes even during our interview.
Yeah, come and stand behind. Yeah, by all means.
The former chief and Korean War veteran always had a passion for sports.
I always participated in sports, but I was never the outstanding athlete. I was just a participant, made the team, and that was it.
Cotie fully understood the impact sports can have on someone's life, but noticed that other Indigenous youth weren't afforded any opportunities.
There was practically no sports and recreation programs on any of the reserves, and I know we had good athletes.
It was then he created the First Nations Winter and Summer Games in 1974. Decades later, the Games continued to thrive, going from 2,500 athletes, coaches, and volunteers to nearly 5,000.
A lot of the parents now are the athletes that were at the first Summer Games and Winter Games, and they thank me for that.
We have a large young population, so we need to ensure that we develop these opportunities.
Lyle Daniels is the game manager. He was one of the organizers that believed the game should honor the man who started it all.
Competition in sport in general brings out all the necessary qualities of being a leader, and very easy to say that existing and leadership that are in right now probably most likely started off as athletes coming to the First Nations Winter and Summer Games.
Now the Games will be known as the Tony Cotie Games, an honor for Cotie, who just wanted to provide a positive avenue for young people.
Still being able to observe and watch the athletes perform, that's it. That's the biggest thing for me.
Moses Wildu, CTV News, Saskatoon.
It's a great honor for Tony. And that is your APTN National News for this Wednesday.
For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Beverly Andrews. Have a good night.
And I'm Dennis Ward. We'll see you back here tomorrow.